In this chapter, we're looking at computer use. I'm Andrew. In the field guide, we are learning to program. We're learning to create these digital realities that can exist within our computer. To get started with this, we really need to understand how to use our computers. Now, this is not using the computer like a normal user, where we use a user interface and click things. Most people know how to do that. What we're looking at here is how to use it like an IT professional, where we get our hands dirty, we get in under the hood and start interacting much more closely with the computer than a normal user would do. With these new tools, we'll be able to do a whole lot more. So getting in and interacting directly means that you're not limited to the way somebody else wants you to do things. You can interact with the computer how you want to set things up, and you can build programs that then allow you to do different things within that environment. So I think this is a really empowering skill, and a really important part of learning to program is actually learning how to use the command line. And that's what this first section is about. So we're looking now at using the terminal, using the command line environment to interact with the operating system. So in this chapter, we're going to go through using the terminal, and the main thing to focus on, I think, for the moment, is how we can interact with files and folders within the terminal. And we'll look then at setting up your computer and getting it ready with all the tools and all of the software you need to start programming. At the start, using the terminal might feel daunting. It's not particularly helpful, doesn't tell you what to do, but persist with it. Have a look at the instructions and commands, play around with it, and as you get more familiar with it, you'll start to see what you can actually do with it. And it's really very empowering once you've done that. I'm going to have a chat later with Charlotte where we'll talk through the terminal and we'll walk through some demos, and we can show you some of the more advanced things that we do with the terminal in that. For the moment, let's think about what the terminal is. The terminal is a command line environment. There's actually two parts here. So with the terminal, what we're picturing is the old style computer, which was called a terminal. It was a monitor, a display, and a keyboard. And the actual computer was in a different room, and we were connected with a cable to that computer. And we were on the terminal. The other end at the computer would then have had the thing we call the shell. The shell is what interprets the details that I provide to it. So there's a number of different terminal programs we might use. But the text that I type into the terminal. When I hit enter, the terminal sends that text to the shell, and the shell interprets it. And that shell, you can picture it like a shell outside of a kernel, the center of the shell, like a nut, for example. So you have the exterior, which is the shell. It's a very thin layer. And within that, we have the kernel of the operating system, the core and the heart of the operating system. So by interacting with the shell, we're interacting very closely to the operating system and being able to use that to interact with things. And here I've got a picture of a terminal where I'm running a different command. This actually builds the SplashKit library. And so it's going through building the library. And that's a script that I wrote so that I can very quickly build the library when we've made changes to it. One of the things that you have to get to grips with when you start with the terminal is understanding the file system. So these are the files and the folders that you've got in your computer. So here I've got on my Mac, we've got Finder, will be the same as Explorer on Windows. And we can see in here I've got folders and I've got files within those folders, and then there's folders within those folders. And within those folders, we've got other files, and they can have other folders, which contains folders with them, etc. This is the file system, and the operating system takes care of managing the file system for us. In the terminal, which I've got open over here, we can see that I start off in a folder. So I'm actually inside this tools folder when I'm in the terminal at the moment. Now I can change directory, and some of the commands you want to look at is really looking at how to list the files in the folder that you're currently in, change into a different folder, and you do that so that you are, or the terminal that is located at the place in the file system where the files you're interacting with are. So in this when I ran this, I was looking at building the SplashKit library, so I was in my tools folder, and that folder contains all of the things that I had in relation to that. So that gave me easy access to those files when I was working in the terminal. And here I've run the find command, which lets me print out all of the things that match that. So I'm finding everything in the current folder, and we can see here we've got all of the other files and folders accessible in the terminal. And I can then use command line instructions to interact with those. That's probably the main thing to start looking at, the idea of moving between folders, the idea of listing files, copying, making folders, deleting files. Obviously be careful of that one. When you delete files in the terminal, there isn't a recycle bin, so you are saying delete this file, not put it in the recycling bin. So be very careful with that one. But other than that, mostly the things you do in the terminal will be fairly safe. The last part of this chapter really then looks at setting up your development environment. And we've got a picture here of the Raspberry Pi kit, which I think is a really fun and exciting way of getting started with programming. This kit, you can purchase all of the components and put it together yourself. You can build variations on the kit. But this would be all you really need to learn programming. You can get a very cheap Raspberry Pi, connect it to your TV if you've got a keyboard and mouse. That's what you need, and all of the rest of the tools are free and open source. You can download those. We have instructions for how to set that up. We also have the instructions for how to set this up on Windows, on Mac OS, and on other Unix variants if you're interested. So can you get started using your computer like a professional, getting under the hood, getting connected with the computer through the terminal is a really great empowering experience. It can be daunting at the start, but don't worry, you can do it. Google is amazing. Just Google if you want to do something. I do it all the time. How do I do this command? Google, how do I do this command? And it will give you details, pages where people talk about, okay, to run this command, here are the options. When I talk to Charlotte later, we'll have a look at some of the examples of those. In this chapter of the book, we're going to go through using the terminal. We're going to go through interacting with files and folders and setting up your computer. So at the end of it, don't feel like you have to have an exhaustive knowledge of everything to do with using the terminal. Your aim here is just to become familiar with it. So there's lots of detail in this chapter. Good idea to skim over it in the first case. Look mostly at the code related or the text related to working with files and folders, but be aware of the other things, like the cool things with listing the processes, running things in the background, killing things, using signals, the idea of piping commands together. These are all fairly advanced ideas. You can grow to those over time. Having some awareness that they exist now will be great, but focus on the working with files and folders part. Enjoy the journey.